I, I can't, I can't understand why they don't understand that this is a natural development.
I think it's one of the greatest things that ever happened. In fact, I admire those people. I respect those people because they are doing what I believe every Negro under the heaven feel if he doesn't have the guts to say it.
What do you think of Malcolm X?
Malcolm X was one of the best friends I ever had. A remarkable man. Oh, he was a great man. In fact, I had invited Malcolm X to come to Mississippi, and he was supposed to come to Mississippi on Monday and was killed that Sunday.
Now, he had belonged to the Muslim organization. Are the Muslim groups making much progress in the South? They seem mostly to be in the North.
Mostly in the North, because a whole lot of things that the Muslims stand for, I don't agree with their policies. But I did respect Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was a great man.
What can you think of that the Muslims advocate that you don't agree with? Can you think of
One
something?
of the things is setting up a separate state. You know, just give the Negroes a state. They want a state, you know, set up. It would have to be more than a state for 20 million black people in this country, but just to have so much separation, you know, that we couldn't, you know, we wouldn't have to deal with white on no terms, and just put us out, what I would say, on a deserted island. And what we had thought of with a lot of white people in the country, we'd last about 2 days.
It's
And
sort of a reverse racism.
yes, and just be wiped off the map. Because you see, I take this stand that I don't see all people as bad. If we didn't have some good white people, it wouldn't be anybody standing up, you know, trying to help bring about a change and make things better, not only for the Negro, but it will benefit every human being in this country if we were just freed.
What do the people in your movement think about Dr. Martin Luther King and his approach to this whole problem?
Well, I couldn't just say in Mississippi, because people have different feelings about Dr. King.
They feel that he's accepting too slow a rate of progress?
Well, to me, it is somewhat slow, but Dr. King's organization do have some great people, like Mrs. Septipa P. Clark, that wrote the book Echoes in My Soul, is a great woman, and there's quite a few other people that I admire in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And
Oh,
Good everything. No,
oh, what?
this is me. Hello.
Hey,
You want to continue it?
no, just yeah, just maybe another
Okay.
30
All
seconds.
right. All right. Hold on.
Let's get her there. Good everything, y'all, because she's about to make a point on class and Dr. King is important.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's good.
respect.
No, we good.
But I take this stand with any person, uh, a person that was born in the middle class that have never had to suffer. You know, he can afford to take things maybe easier than I can, and all I've ever done was suffered, you see. And in fact, a person that's born in the middle class and have always had things somewhat decent, he can't make a decision for me because he actually don't know how I feel.
You know, when we
There we
mention
go.
middle
There we go.
Okay.
Isn't that something?
Oh, I needed to hear that.
Yes, ma'am. We all do.
Hello. Good everything.
Hello, good everything. Why'd you say that? You said I needed to hear that.
Yeah, I was a person born in the middle class and didn't suffer.
And
And
you fight for us.
I mean, but I'm not fighting. I don't think about it like fighting for us as much as, you know, making it good for everybody. Like I just want everyone to be okay. So,
Right.
but I don't think I'm making decisions either. I'm not saying, well, we should do this. I'm asking questions. Every day I start the show at some point and I say, everyone lives somewhere. What do you need where you live? I think the call to action is for people to sit in their condition and determine what needs to happen to get out of it and what they can do to participate in that. And Fannie Lou Hamer, what a woman.
That's an interesting. Yeah. In fact, maybe we can start there. I mean, here we have we're at the centennial of the birth of Malcolm X, and we know that in a society with millions of people and ultimately a planet with billions, these moments, these ritual moments, become opportunities to think not only about ourselves as individuals, but think collectively, or at least consider other people. That's the only significance of these moments. But when we think about what we need as a species, as people, how do we solve those I don't want to call them problems, those challenges, those opportunities to help everybody at scale,
Hmm.
or even beyond just us? As you ask people every day, what do you need? Okay, well, this is what I need. Okay, so how does what an individual needs connect to what other individuals need in your mind?
I don't want to oversimplify it. I was telling you,
No, no,
I
yeah,
did a tribute to Joe Madison today, that will run on his birthday, which is the day after Father's Day.
mhm,
And, we both now are on a channel that basically was something that he birthed and laid a foundation for. And it was centering this notion of rights, so he was marching and did hunger strikes for civil rights, for there to be voting rights. And it's really simple. If we can remove racism and racism's baby capitalism, the birth of, the arm, the execution arm of capitalism, which is racism, and get people out of this notion that somehow the problem with why I'm not where I need to be is my neighbor, or that Mexican, or that Black, or that person that's in my neighborhood that is, coming in with a nail care place, and I can't feed my family, but they're coming in taking my money out, but not recognizing that that was by design, right? So first we got to be rooted in knowledge. All right, how do we get here? What is the here that we're in, and how did we get here? Okay, because a handful of people wanted to gobble up most of the resources and money, and the way that they were able to do that is to make sure that the masses are fighting each other. Sun Tzu talked about it, right? We know divide and conquer is one of the biggest, best tactics in war. And we see it time and time again. It is so effective. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is, how am I allowing myself to divide so that I can be conquered? What
yeah,
notions do I have about other people that keep us from being a collective? Even Black folk, especially Black folk. What notions do I have about other Black folk? If I've come into this country from Africa or some other place, and I think that the notion of Blackness is one thing, why do I think that? Why am I speaking English?
that's right.
Okay. Like, why is there white Jesus in my country? Why do they want to bring mosques and not hospitals? Why don't I have clean water where I live? Like, the problem's not the person that's coming across the southern border in the United States. The problem is something way greater and also defeatable if
Exactly.
we come together, right? So when Fanny Lou Hamer said, yeah, I understand the notion, if just give us these states. But what she's saying is, look at Rosewood and Greenwood and Wilmington. Give us these states. Now they have a collective way to bomb all of us at one time. She's like, no, no, no. We will not. Just like right now, we ain't going in them streets for you to use us as cannon fodder so you can declare martial law and wipe us out. We're not doing that. Our cities are already set up for tanks to come in. All right. If you think about where we live and how cities are set up, it's set up for tanks to roll in. They've planned city planning for our demise. We're not going to hand them that. So when she said that, I was like, yeah, but I get the need. If we could just leave us alone, they don't want to leave us alone. That's not
That's
the
interesting.
goal. They don't want us to go away. They want us to be back in that position. They can't live without us. But they
Well, they
damn
never
sure
live
don't want to
without.
be subjugated to us.
They never live without us. We are them, after all. Though they are us.
Period. That too.
I mean, there's a. I hear it as unfinished. I hear a white man in a white social structure asking Fannie Lou Hamer questions that she would not, on her own, be thinking about, and I hear her responding in real time, thinking through the answers. That where we started was although we didn't hear it there, and for those who you know, you want to refer, this is after the assassination of Malcolm X. This white guy asks her about the Deacons for Defense in Louisiana.
I'm gonna actually drop the link to the whole video.
Oh, please do, yeah, so everybody can. Yeah.
Hi, chat. Hello, everyone.
Hey, y'all, what's going on, y'all? Good to see everybody. Yes, that's exactly right, and so everybody can hear the whole thing, and you hear what she says there, because of course the Deacons for Defense weren't going out to shoot people, weren't going to Louisiana, they weren't going out to kill anybody, but they were armed. Many of them veterans. Some of them, some of the children of the Deacons still around. Chuck Hicks, here in D.C., his father was one of the Deacons. In fact, the rifle in his family from the Deacons for Defense is in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Everybody can turn the temperature down on, at least, you know, be aware, and we got to work, but that rifle is not going anywhere. That museum is not going anywhere, certainly, as we do what we need to do. But Mrs. Hamer says, I support what they're doing. I agree with what they're doing. And they're doing what a lot of Negroes in this country would do if they had the guts. Now, at that moment, she's saying, get the strap. Okay. And she's from an all black community with a handful of white people, who's the one that put her and Pap off that plantation. So there's that. And then he very quickly moves to Malcolm X. Where is he going with this? You trying to get her to talk about violence. And she just talked about violence. In other words, does Fanny Lou Hamer, if you get that test to a 10-year-old, does Fanny Lou Hamer support violence? There are a couple of ways you can answer that. Could depend. Did you come on her property? Why? Because she just supported the Deacons for Defense. And she said, in fact, she thinks that many Negroes in this country would support them too if they were going to have the guts that she has. So I had no problem with that. Now let's go to Malcolm. She didn't say, I know Malcolm. He's a nice guy. She said, Malcolm X is the greatest friend I had in my life. Oh my goodness. Oh my. Now, she doesn't go into detail about how she was in Harlem raising money, how she ran for Congress with the Mississippi Freedom Democrats, and how Malcolm X, in fact, Peter Bailey, who was there that night, I did not know that until last week, who, you know, I'll see Monday when we had the 100th anniversary on the actual birthday at Howard, he's going to speak. Peter Bailey, 87 years old, born in Columbus, Georgia, raised in Tuskegee, Malcolm's lieutenant, editor of his newsletter, of the OAAU, the last surviving member of the OAAU who was there at the beginning. He told us the other night at Sankofa, we sitting there with Holly, we in the conversation. He said, I was there that night that Malcolm introduced Fanny Lou Hamer. And that's the only time, and all the time I knew Malcolm, I was very close with Malcolm and his family. The only time I ever seen Malcolm X speechless and tongue-tied was when he was with Fanny Lou Hamer. And when you hear the introduction, you can hear his effusive praise. So when she tells that white man, he was the greatest friend I had in my life. Wow. And then he's going to still push her. Because then she says, well, I don't agree with everything the Muslims. Now she's talking about the Muslims. She's not talking about Malcolm. She's talking about the Nation of Islam, which he is no longer in. So now he's going, well, what do you think? He said, well, and then she gets to the separate states. But notice how she says it. She says, you know, they want to have a state. And then she said, had to be more than one state. In other words, the numbers. And then she said, but they will wipe us out. Okay. People would think, and Dr. King said this, you know, it would be self-defeating, but guess what? In that gesture, now she hadn't thought about this beyond, and she's talking because he's pushing her to talk. But I'm thinking about it, and I'm saying, okay, because Mississippi was one of those states. The Republic of New Africa said we should take one of the 5 states. They also said white people didn't have to leave, but what they had to do was live in a state where black people would ensure that everybody had rights. And the Republic of New Africa was founded as the Malcolm X Society. Milton Henry and Richard Henry, now known as Amari Obadeli and Gaidi Obadeli. By the way, Gaidi Obadeli is the one who recorded the message to the grassroots speech that Malcolm gave in Detroit the day after his house was bombed, and Barry Gordy, the one who pressed it out and published it and record in the recording. But I'm saying all that to say that in 2025, that same Mississippi that Fanny Lou Hamer was raised in, the governor of the biggest, the mayor of the biggest state is the son of one of the members of the Republic of New Africa. That of course is Chokwe Lumumba's son, Chokwe Antar. So Mrs. Hamer is not saying, I'm listening to her thinking, it's never going to be no all black states. And she said, we got to have white people. There's some good white people, which in my mind means by exclusion, the majority of whites who are sitting on the sideline. She's in Mississippi. So I'm not hearing her, In other words, the fantasy that we could be in an all-black space that was self-governing, absolutely, because we're interconnected. She's talking about that. But the idea of black control, which she fought for, Mississippi Freedom Democrats were integrated, but they were overwhelmingly black. That to me is an open question she's thinking through. And then he gets to Martin Luther King. He's looking for a place to make her start a beef. And she says, oh, yeah, Dr. King, I support. And then she's very careful not to go on with Dr. King, but to lift up Septimus Clark and say, Septimus, like there's some fine members of his organization. Like Fanny Hammer's playing chess with this white man. He don't even know what she's doing. And this is she's taking it from an individual to the collective and lifted a sister who has done all this collective work, created the citizenship education program. And then he comes back around to her on King, and she's like, well, there are people in the class, social class, they can afford to wait a little longer. I'm thinking that now, for those of us, they can't speak for us. We need it to happen a little faster. Okay. It's a very complicated conversation. So when people say, well, Malcolm versus Martin, no, listen to Miss Hamer for just 4 minutes. And you're going to disabuse yourself of all them notions. You got to go make black people choose we get to say who our people are. So to me, it's very, and there's no conclusions reached, but she opens up so many possibilities for liberation. And what you said is so true. We're a species. We're going to have to make this together, but it's going to require some serious, work. I don't know.
No, I first of all, thank you. As you're walking us through it, the work of walking through these things and not having these knee-jerk, black and white, very, definitive ways. This is a process.
Yes.
And these times are not the 60s and the 50s. These are some different times. And we have some challenges. And while y'all think, I would never, you're about to find out whether you will ever. Because to her point, the courage that it requires in this moment, many of us aren't prepared for. Fanny Lou Hamer and them were prepared for. As I was saying to you off mic, they done beat that lady, took her uterus. She was like, I have nothing to lose. So I'm going to stay in the fight. Some of y'all have a lot to lose and aren't willing to put up not an iota of sacrifice to make sure that the rest of us are going to be good, or the people who will be here after we're gone. So this is that time, and we'll see, Dr. Carr. Some days I'm like, whew. Some days I'm like, we just ain't ready. We're not ready. But I'm sure that the folk that was snatched up and put on boats, and they weren't ready either. To endure 400 years of that. No, I don't think you can ever get ready for something or truly prepare for what it is when it comes, because you won't know what it looks like. To your point, it's funny. I was talking with Shauna Renee, Joe Madison's daughter, and her dad when he was making transition, said to her he wanted her to take over his show, and she was like, no, I don't want to do that. And she said, now here you come. And so, and my husband said, your father meant what he said. Now it may not look exactly like what he envisioned, but yeah, he meant that. And he's still here, and he's letting you know I meant that. So, and I don't, so I just feel like, sometimes it's not going to look exactly like what you think salvation is or what liberation is, but you have to be obedient to that drive, and every day get up and do something.
Yes.
And see what happens.
You have to see what happens.
And together, like as we sit here, 271
here we are,
consecutive weeks of, and then some sprinkled in, other ancillary conversations we've had. The drumbeat of what you put down, it is unmistakable. It is unmatched in this time. I'm interviewing somebody who went to Howard and was like, I said, did you ever take a class with Dr. Carr? He's on this TV show, The Shy.
Yeah.
Burgundy Baker. And she said, I could never get in his class, but I would see him on campus floating on campus, because he's like, majesty, it's magical. And all of the young people would be there. And she said, I would be like, oh my God, if I could ever. And Shauna Renee was like, I'm Howard all day. Tell Dr. Carr, said, and y'all see each other, but it's something about the commitment to our liberation through knowledge that if I wish everybody would be committed to it. But as I often say, we don't need everybody.
No,
But
we don't.
we have. I'm very grateful. So I just want to say
No,
thank you.
thank you. No, thank you. I never had any aspiration, imagining that I would be in that family at Sirius, knowing Joe Madison enough, seeing him in the streets. It was where I seen him. I had been to his house, never went to dinner with him, just being around him and being in conversation when we did see each other, especially toward the end of his physical life. And to imagine that, every time I walk in that Eagle's Nest, realizing that that wasn't the original place that Joe Madison came into, that had to be created through struggle, through support, and through realization. That space had to be made. Anytime I'm sitting in there, next to the mic, and then sitting out there, and Daryl's on the board, Sam is in my ear, and I'm thinking, what would Joe do? Because I'm not Joe Madison. None of us are Joe Madison. However, there is a unbroken chain, and the chain that links me to Joe Madison in that space is not Joe Madison, it's you. And that's how we have to understand genealogy. Genealogy is the unbroken chain. And everybody doesn't need to be in the chain. But without that chain, we don't have an anchor. We don't have a mooring. Everybody can be part of it, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, everybody is never part of it. Ms.
Right.
Hamer shouldn't have had a struggle in Mississippi, not with the hundreds of thousands of people who were there, but somebody had to say something. The Democratic Party, people say that, we're shelves of Democrats, and I accept that. I do accept it because it's not spoken out of contempt or anger, it's spoken out of ignorance. And ignorance is why we sit in the United States of America in the way that we're sitting in it right now. And we understand that the Democratic Party, that people accuse those who are speaking up and thinking very pragmatically about how do we make progress in a duopoly until we can dismantle the duopoly, because it's not going anywhere today. So since it is the duopoly, how do we overcome it in the context we are? Then who can say in one breath that, well, both these parties are the same, and then in the next breath talk about Fanny Lou Hamer? You clearly haven't read or listened to Mrs. Hamer. Mrs. Hamer started, along with others, the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. That is an independent political party. But they used the delivery system of the Democratic Party of the 1960s to advance the agenda of Black liberation, which by extension meant human liberation. They used that Democratic Party because of what they were able to achieve with their independent party within that confine. Many of the white nationalists in the Democratic Party, who up until then had been very comfortable in the Democratic Party, looked for another way to maintain or expand their authority which had been, up until the 1960s, largely untroubled and uncomplicated, particularly in places like Mississippi. And where did they go in a duopoly? Asking the same question we were asking, except from the opposite end. We wanted to include everybody. They wanted to maintain white supremacy. They fled the Democratic Party. Did they start an independent party? They most certainly did not. Over the years, whether it be the John Birchers or the Tea Party or the MAGA movement, they certainly had independent political formations, but in a duopoly, realizing they couldn't get where they needed to get because we had driven out of the Democratic Party at least the nominal clinging to white nationalism as a governing logic, because that's what parties are. Political parties, they are devices, they are institutional formations that allow you to project an ideology, a political worldview. Having realized they couldn't do it in the Democratic Party for the foreseeable future, they fled. Did they start an independent party? Absolutely not. They went to the Republican Party. So in 2025, for people to say, we need our own party, you've said nothing new. To come to the governance category in our Africana Studies framework, when you look at who African people are to each other, the idea of a Black political party is something that was given birth in the 19th century and has been formed and reformed and passed on from generation to generation to generation over the arc of generations since then. Particularly after the 1960s, when you have the studied development of independent Black political parties. We've talked about this many times. Then you understand, even Malcolm X talked about that. talked about everyone registering to vote. He said, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as an independent. I ain't voting. You should listen to Malcolm X. You have him on your t-shirt while you're telling people not to vote. But you don't have him in your mind. You haven't listened. One of the things Peter Bailey always says about his friend Malcolm X was that Malcolm X was a master listener. He was a master listener. He had the ability. He said, I would go to meetings, to rallies, to speeches with Malcolm. And he said, I would watch as Malcolm sat there and listened. He told Lamont and I this on the air. I've heard it many times, but I think it was the first time Lamont heard it, and maybe first time a lot of listeners heard it on Sirius XM Urban View Mornings. Baba Peter said, I could almost see him listening. You know, somebody listening, you can see them listen. He says kind of listener he was. And so when we listen to Malcolm, we understand that the ballot is a tool, not a means to an end, but a tool. And you have independent Black political parties. We saw what happened at Gary in 1972. Friday, the 16th of May, it's the birthday of the late John Conyers, the Wosir John Conyers, to use the Kemetic language or the Greek rendering of Wosir, Osiris, the Osiris John Conyers, who everybody who passes over into the land of the ancestors, the Egyptians would call the Osiris or the Wosir, or the ancestor John Conyers. And his birthday on the 16th of May. And Conyers, a link in a chain, birthed at Gary. A link in a chain, birthed in the 1960s. A link in a chain, birthed in the 1950s and 40s. Queen Mother Audley Moore, active in the 1930s and 40s, friends with Malcolm X, helping him grow his global worldview in the 1940s and 50s, present at Gary in 1972, 7 years after the assassination of Malcolm X. Talking about reparations in Gary, Indiana in 1972, even as Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King sit on the stage behind Jesse Lewis Jackson and Amiri Baraka and Congressman Diggs out of Detroit and the mayor of Gary, Indiana, Richard Hatcher, as they opened the 1972 Gary Political Convention, Black Political Convention, the convening of African people from different ideological postures, but all together in the name of something else that Baba Peter says Malcolm was a central proponent of, which is unity. Operational unity, a very famous phrase from the 1960s. We don't have to agree on everything, but let us be unified on the things we agree on and unified in the struggle for our collective liberation. At that moment, they are there in Gary to form what? A Black political party. At the same time that Shirley Chisholm, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, the fledgling Congressional Black Caucus, 3 years old, the Congressional Black Caucus, is running for president. She did not attend the Gary Convention. The scholars will say that it's sexism. The scholars will say that it's political elitism and infighting among the bourgeois class. All those things, there are elements of truth in all of them, but there's another element as well, and that is what? In 1972, the Gary the Black Political Convention convened, and when Shirley Chisholm said, I want you to endorse me in my run for president, the response was no. We're not endorsing any candidates. Oh, well, then maybe I don't come. We want you to come, but if you come and looking for an endorsement, we're not endorsing a candidate. Think about that. Now, what happens after Gary 1972? There is an explosion of Black elected officials. At the state level, the local level, the national level, mostly at the local level. An explosion that, in terms of the ratio and the surge, was unprecedented in U.S. history, but in terms of an explosion, we see its predecessor in the late 1860s and early 1870s in the South, the Reconstruction period. We've been here before, friends. No, we've never seen a clown get offered a plane or get $2 billion put into his bank account, him and his feckless ass sons, from the United Arab Emirates, and then the next day announce a multi-billion-dollar deal for AI centers in the UAE, 10 square miles with hundreds of thousands of chips come from Libya. I thought this man was talking about returning jobs to the United States. No, they put $2 billion in his bank account and he opened up like a flower. Y'all know that metaphor. Let that linger. Listen, the point is this. In 1972, in the wake of 72, Black people got involved in politics in a way that they hadn't been involved since the Reconstruction, a century earlier. and flooded elective office. Were these people in Gary? Was Queen Mother Moore Shield? Was Betty Shabazz and Mary Baraka and Coretta Scott King a Shield? Were Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and Jesse Louis Jackson a Shield? Was Queen Mother Moore a Shield? Can you imagine that? I did not know Queen Mother Moore well. The times I got to meet her is because the Kelseys and the community in Columbus invited her to Columbus, Ohio for her birthday one time, and she kept coming back. So I got a chance to listen to Queen Mother Moore and to sit with her. And then in Harlem with Dolores Blakely, who was many ways her lieutenant in Harlem. So I got to be around Queen Mother Moore. And I tell you right now, if you call Queen Mother Moore a shield to her face, you would have been an ancestor before she became one. And the point I'm trying to make is that the lack of sophistication of analysis in our communities became and becomes a question of listening and paying attention and study. And that's where we are today. This is where we are today. 100 years since the birth of Malcolm X in Omaha, Nebraska. And this is a life of self-transformation. Manning Marable, in probably the most famous book on Malcolm X besides the Autobiography. And I knew Manning Marable. Manning Marable was a great brother, an incredible spirit, gone too soon from this plane, but a powerful ancestor. His book is by no means a definitive book on Malcolm X. It's not the best book on Malcolm X, in my opinion. It's not even close. The reason that it is embraced the way it is, I am convinced, is because it is a book that social structure oriented people. In other words, the people in the United States of America who really don't want to take Malcolm X on his terms are more comfortable with. Malcolm X was not a bourgeois Democrat. Du Bois said he's a bourgeois Democrat, but he's also a socialist and dealt with the communists. And he certainly was a Pan-Africanist. He's a lot of different things. John Clark said, I'm a socialist, I'm a Pan-Africanist, I'm a nationalist, all at the same time, and I see no contradictions. Putting labels on people creates problems. And Malcolm X, the subtitle of that book, A Life of Reinvention, I think both the title and the substance of the book, when you read the book, falls short of capturing the consistencies in Malcolm's life. The description of Malcolm X and Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, which draws on primary sources, but more secondary and tertiary sources than primary sources, and in certain elements of the book draws on openly hostile renderings of Malcolm with very little to no evidentiary support, like Bruce Perry's book, Malcolm X, The Life of a Man Who Changed America, a book which the Manning Marable biography leans on heavily to discuss Malcolm's sexuality, a discussion without a shred of evidence, but becomes the salacious heart of many of those who embrace the book as some kind of revelation. It is not, certainly not on that topic. I'm saying all this, and I'll come back to this in a moment. So we talk a little bit more about this in the context of scholarship on Malcolm and writing on Malcolm. I'm saying all this to say that the rendering is a life of reinvention, like he's reinventing himself. No, he's remarkably consistent. And I think that consistency is what scares the hell out of the white nationalist structure in the United States and internationally. The consistency does not come from Elijah Muhammad. It doesn't come from the Nation of Islam. What does come from Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam is the platform, is the point of entry, the conduit for awakening the discipline, awakening the focus, awakening the clarity, and feeding the natural capacity that Malcolm Little came to the planet on. And I say reawakening because he was an excellent student growing up. He was a very disciplined young child growing up, as were all his siblings, because they were raised by parents who were incredibly disciplined, who were Garveyites. Now we go into the social structure in terms of Malcolm X, and we won't spend a lot of time on it, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. I'll put the timer on that, about 5 minutes. That way I'll remain on time. By the way, as Baba Peter would say, and everybody who knew Malcolm said, he was always on time. He didn't want to be too early. He certainly wasn't going to be late. So sometimes even the day that the assassins took his life, He got there a little early, the Autobahn, and then circled the block a couple of times. He didn't want to be too early. He was going to be on time. So make sure this time is right. But in the process of talking about a life shaped by self-transformation, by Black self-determination, and an unwavering commitment to global liberation, the seeds for that were planted by his parents, Earl Little, Louise Little. And in fact, I don't think I have it in here, but if I did, I would show it to everybody. I think it may be in the other room. The life of Louise Little has received more and more recent attention because of, no, that's fine, because we talked about it. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. There's been a recent biography on Louise Little, on his mother, who lived, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 1991 until 1991, which is really something. Maybe 1989, but my point is this. She outlived her son by 25 years. But she disappears from history in the autobiography when they send her to the mental facility. A facility that Malcolm and his siblings, his sister Yvonne talks about that in the documentary Make It Plain, got her out of before Malcolm was assassinated, obviously. And Yvonne, Malcolm's younger sister, one of the younger siblings, says to him while he's, traveling the world and debating and organizing, I don't feel right with mom in that place. And he said, I've been thinking about that, and you're right. We need to get her out. And they were, she said, he didn't say anything else to me about it. Next thing you know, I got a call. Mom was in Lansing. I have no doubt that his notoriety, his popularity, his profile helped in that process. Malcolm and his siblings got their mother out of that facility, but that doesn't fit neatly into narratives, especially narratives like, Manny Marable, less so than Peniel Joseph, my friend Peniel Joseph, who will be speaking at the National Museum of African American History and Culture this weekend about Malcolm X to celebrate the centennial. There are a lot of celebrations around, a lot of commemorations around. But, whether it be Peniel's book, The Sword and the Shield, or any of his books really on what he calls Black Power studies, ultimately trying to bend that question of Black self-determination and resolve it into a notion somehow of quintessentially American values. John Rickford does something very similar in his book, less so perhaps on Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife, although there is that too in a book called We Are African People on African-centered independent schools and education institutions, something that I didn't go through the African-centered independent schools, but I spent a lot of time in them with them and was shaped and molded by leaders of that movement, whether it be Baba Hannibal Tyreek out of Chicago, or Baba Jituwe Usi out of New York, or Baba Aji Akoto, the Akoto family here in Washington, D.C., shaped profoundly by those folks. So when I read books and essays and articles by academics on them that try to thread democracy through there, I'm not offended. I don't take it as an insult. I look at it as, let me see the sources you used in case there are a couple I'm not aware of, but your rendering, your narrative is very nearly worthless. I understand why, because the white university presses that you're writing for, the white institutions you're looking to achieve tenure and notoriety in, just can't stomach Black self-determination. Even the HBCUs would have a difficult time with it. I work at one of them. So I'm well aware of the punishment that comes with teaching a lot of students and being around all the time. Them Negroes try to shoehorn you into something else. But guess what? I can take it. Malcolm took it. And unlike Malcolm, I got a chance to go to school for a lot of years. Malcolm got through junior high school before they knocked him off course, killing his father, splitting up the family. Malcolm was an A student. And so Malcolm's journey, his self-transformation, is in many ways a restoring of values that were poured into him from the time he came out of his mother's womb. And as Les Payne writes in the beginning of this book, which we've talked about, The Dead Are Rising, The Life of Malcolm X, he starts this book, Les Payne does, with Born Against the Current is chapter 1. The metallic clicking of hoofbeats on the gravel road drew 5-year-old Wilfred to the small pane window. Oldest boy, the oldest child. His mother, wiping her hands, hurried to the front door as a group of horsemen with flickering torches rode up to their wood frame home on the outskirts of Omaha, Nebraska. "Little!" yelled one of the half-dozen men. Louise Little said that her husband was not at home, and with the tree leaves rustling in the evening breeze, the horsemen steadied their mounts in the front yard and declared that they were the knights of the Ku Klux Klan. "Get that nigger out of here now!" one of the strangers shouted. Haltingly, a young housewife, precise in her West Indian accent — she was from Grenada, after all, by way of Canada, internationalism, in other words, in the veins of Malcolm X — haltingly, the young housewife, precise in her West Indian accent, said that her family didn't cause trouble or bother neighbors, that they minded their own business. What do you need? The excitement of the horses died down for young Wilfred as his mother folded her arms. Seen against the flickering kerosene light, she was a sight that, at least temporarily, might have given the white vigilantes pause. Light complexion, with thick hair flowing to her waist, Mrs. Little stood taller than the average man of her day, at more than 5 feet 8 inches, and she was pregnant. She was big, Wilfred said years later. She was expecting at any time. They started arguing. She drives them off the porch. They start breaking windows, threatening to set fire to the place, but they ultimately ride off. Guess what? Louise Little was pregnant with Malcolm. Malcolm X came into this world confronting white supremacy because his mother confronted white supremacy quite literally on the steps of her house, in the front door of her house, confronted with the Klan in Omaha, Nebraska. On the 19th of May, we mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of Malcolm X. This is a centennial shaped of a life shaped by self-transformation, Black self-determination, and unwavering commitment to global liberation. His words, his actions continue to challenge systems rooted in white supremacy, now desperately clinging to power through international self-dealing. Shout out to the clown in his court. International self-dealing. Unprecedented in some ways, completely consistent in most ways. Meaning what? This is how the United States does business. It has always been the way. The clown is either too stupid, too greedy, or too self-serving to hide it, to try to hide it. So as a result, we get to see it. No backdoor deals this time. The unprecedented stuff is when the UAE just says, here's $2 billion for some fake stuff called a meme coin or whatever you're doing, digital currency. That's unprecedented. What's unprecedented is the hotels in the United Arab Emirates and Dubai and the projections of them other places, like, for example, Gaza, where the killers of the Israeli Defense Force and Israeli military are continuing unimpeded in their wanton slaughter of human beings, indefensible slaughter of human beings in Gaza. But the clown has said we could turn it into the Riviera. I want a hotel there. Well, the Arabs have said we can buy this fool. This is how we do business. So they're plying him. He looks like a complete and utter clown, coming off of jets to purple carpeted runways, to the bottom of the runway where they usher him off to gaudy palaces with gold just as ostentatiously gaudy as he got the ceilings and the fixtures in the White House looking that way. So he's right at home with the polished floors. Any of y'all ever been to that region of the world, and even in Kemet where we go, you will see the polished, we know that polished stone in the floor where you better be careful. You ain't got the right shoes on, you're gonna slip and bust your ass walking across until we've seen this. I mean, you look at him, he's perfectly at home because they're plying him, they're flattering him, they're pumping money into his decaying empire and his inbred sons, his emissaries before him. They've already put money from their sovereign wealth funds into their pockets. So that is unprecedented. What's not unprecedented is the United States being open for business. And while there are differences between Republicans and Democrats, ultimately the idea that you were somehow going to create a nativist, America first, inward looking empire that would bring all these jobs back was always a fantasy. And over the last week, what we've seen is the clown on his knees, coolly negotiating between the legs of anybody with some money. And at this point, it's Dubai and the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis, where he was welcomed first by a man who ordered a hit on a journalist in broad daylight. A man who was dismembered not far from where I'm sitting. And the evidence sent back But hey, it's business. We shaking hands. Read the book, House of Bush, House of Saud, if you understand the Saudis. Understand that, of course, as we know, on the day of the attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the flight that ended up in the ground in Schwenkerville, Pennsylvania, on that day that the family of Osama bin Laden was rounded up and gotten out of the country. Understand, this isn't conspiracy theory, this is just business. But the clown, dropping all pretenses, a useful idiot and a delivery system for the aspirations of those who have planned for 60 years in the shadow of the wake of the passing of Malcolm X, certainly in the shadow of the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Mrs. Fanny Lou Hamer, one of the reasons she was in Harlem, New York, organizing, and Malcolm X introduced her that night, that Peter Bailey was there to hear the conversation. And then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed in the summer after the assassination of Malcolm X in February 21st, 1965. By the end of that summer, the Voting Rights Act had been delivered, and they had been fighting for 60 years since to try to roll it back, up to and including this week at the Supreme Court, where Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act took another hit, as the white nationalist majority on the United States Supreme Court said that you cannot file a case as a private citizen or an individual to argue that a polity has deprived you of your civil rights in terms of your right to vote. That no, those cases must be filed by the United States government, the Attorney General. They didn't decide that this week, but they did hear oral arguments to that effect. That is the oral argument that is being made by the white nationalists, because at the level of the circuit courts of appeal, one circuit has said, yeah, no more individual cases, not just individuals, but entities. Even as we heard earlier this month of May 2025, that the state of Alabama's maps would not be redrawn because the violations of the Voting Rights Act there that led to the redrawing of maps that led to another plurality to majority Black electoral district for congressional representation, the Alabama 2nd, which led to the election of Shamari Figures, one of the most recent members of the United States Congress, federal legislature, that those maps would continue to be good. They don't violate the Constitution. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act allows that. In fact, maybe even requires that. But guess what? That case wouldn't be brought today because the good brother who argued that case argued it on behalf of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and that entity wouldn't be allowed to argue any cases, nor would any individual or entity outside of the United States government be allowed to make a Section 2 challenge. So all of that pushback 60 years after the assassination of Malcolm X and the struggles that led to Bloody Sunday in Selma the following month, March 1965, and ultimately the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the summer of 1965, they have been organizing for 60 years to roll back not just the 20th century, but the 19th as well, because they are going, when they start talking about original intent and founding fathers, what they want to do is restore to a default position the white republic that was imagined by their slave-owning ancestors. Talk about unbroken links in the chain in the 18th century, 1787 federal constitution. Fleeing felons, criminals, crimes against humanity, not the United States, crimes against humanity, because the laws of the United States were set up to enable the George Washingtons, the Thomas Jeffersons, the Donald Trumps, the James Wait, did I say? Right. Yeah, sure. He's right with them in terms of racist. I make no distinction between George Washington and Donald Trump on the fundamental question of who are Africans to other people. And so it's very nice to have a delivery system like Donald Trump at this point, because Kevin Roberts and Russell Vaught and the Project 2025 boys who are driving a great deal of this agenda don't give a damn about $2 billion for virtual, for digital money or whatever. What they give a damn about is white control of the United States of America and making sure that Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor lifts its torch and says, we are the last best hope of the white world. Afrikaners, come to us for our last stand. And make no mistake, it is a last stand. So, we're marking this 100th birthday with these of a man who, if he were physically here today, would be making this analysis. But we don't need him to physically be here today because he's got all these words and all these actions which allow us to understand the continuing challenge to these systems rooted in white supremacy that are now desperately clinging to power through international self-dealing, through global realignments. The UAE gonna build this huge this huge AI plant, 10 square miles. And while the Biden administration was like, yeah, we want to export some of this so that we can continue to be a leader in AI, the United States of America is the leader in AI in terms of the intellectual work behind it. But that gap is very rapidly closing. And as the Chinese work on their own artificial intelligence plants and their own artificial intelligence equipment and technology and chips, the clown, $2 billion richer, said, we're going to rethink all these relationships. We're going to build this big ass plant over here, this big AI, because they can do more than we can do in terms of energy, the energy required to drive these kind of things. Well, guess what? No problem. But guess also what? The UAE, the Saudis, they got strong relationships with the Chinese. Part of the reason Biden and them were like, we ain't going to do it is not because they're not open to it. The United States open for business, but they didn't want the Chinese to somehow get a hold of some of them hundreds of thousands of chips they're going to send over there and maybe reverse engineer it and add to what they know and flood everything and surge past them. Well, guess what? You think somehow that some of these chips not going to find their way into the Chinese hand? You're not paying attention. I don't have a dog in the fight, friends, because I understand, as does anybody who's listening and studying, that the nation state is a recent development in world history and human experience. And it is fragmenting. It has been fragmenting almost since its inception. And that the age of empires is coming to an end, even for the Chinese. Malcolm X understood that. So as this season of self-dealing and this desperate clinging to white racial power, this desperate domestic clinging to white power through international self-dealing, realignments, and domestic attacks on voting rights, on birthright citizenship and national identity, as this thing is beginning to emerge, one question persists from the time that Malcolm X was on the planet, from his birth to his death and beyond to now. What would he say? Well, we have the Autobiography of Malcolm X. We have ongoing efforts to define and redefine his legacy. We have dialogues with elders, organizers, artists, and scholars, elders who knew him. In a minute, we're going to get to that in a second. Malcolm, not just a man, he's representative of an ongoing, unfinished movement. He's not a perfect person. There's no perfect person in the world. The Christians would say there was one. I don't have a dog in that fight either. But we've explored Malcolm in many sessions of In Class. He's one of the major people we've talked about over and over again. And we'll spend the rest of this short time we had together talking about some of those ways we've explored it. But one of the things that Malcolm X taught us to do, or reminded us of, taught maybe the generations that were in his physical orbit at the time, particularly the younger people, reminded others who were here when he showed up on the scene, and reminded still others who were inspired and instructed by his example, was to witness. He taught us, he reminded us to witness, to act, to witness and to act. White nationalism is in a violent death rattle right now. It's very frightening if you look at it as somehow a reassertion of its power. It is not reasserting its power. It's in a death rattle. And this isn't a moment for silence. Why? Because the death rattle precedes what? Death. This obscene, overt, desperate race cry from Pam Bondi, little Marco Rubio, doggone Christy Nome, Pete Hegseth, and all these names that we shouldn't know. All these TV people from Fox News who are getting flooded into a government as if they are in control, when in fact they're taking orders and allowed to do it with the flourish that is putting the icing on the cake. It's a death rattle, friends. And as Malcolm X might say, you don't make peace with injustice. You finish the job. So A couple of weeks ago when we were here, in the Emboggy in the YouTube side, somebody asked what movie might be the place to start to talk about Malcolm. And I suggested a couple. The Gil Noble series. Gil Noble did an incredible series. They showed it at Sankofa last week. And then the film is the best single film in terms of interviewing people who knew Malcolm, his siblings like Ella Collins and Yvonne Little, Wilfred and Filbert. The film that interviews Peter Bailey and so many others, Ozzie Davis. Just too many people. Malcolm Jarvis, known as Shorty. You see Spike Lee play Shorty Jarvis in his movie on Malcolm X. That's the movie Make It Plain. The film Make It Plain. The documentary Make It Plain. Drawing heavily on the archive of Henry Hampton, who did Eyes on the Prize. Judy Richardson, our friend Judy Richardson, a former member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of the proprietors of Drum and Spear Bookstore here in D.C., and long distance runner, brilliant, worked on Eyes on the Prize, part of that Black Watch crew, a co-producer of Make It Plain. I said that's the one I would say if you have to start with one. The companion book by Cheryl Green and William Strickland, Bill Strickland, recent ancestor, Malcolm X, Make It Plain, excellent. We talked about that when we talked about that film in sessions 62 and sessions 166 of In Class. So go back to Prof. Hunter's webpage, Prof. Hunter's YouTube page, or to the Knarrative archive. Come over to Knarrative and you'll see, you're looking for those numbers, 62 and 166, and you'll see us talking about that film. We watched and had a lively conversation about the film the other night, Sunday night, Mother's Day, in a session at Sankofa. And shout out to all the Nubians. We have a consistent crew of folks from the DMV and sometimes from outside the DMV who come and are in conversation. And it really is remarkable to have these intergenerational conversations. I had a number of Howard students who had class is out, school is out, but they hadn't yet left the city, and some are staying here for the summer who were there as well. And it just does my heart so beautiful. Also, it was beautiful to meet a brother who I had never met, Brother Ahmed Osman. Ahmed, Ahmed, Osman, Osman, Ahmed Osman. Ahmed Osman is Muslim. He is a Nubian. He's not on the Egypt side of the border of Nubia. He's on the Sudan side. So they would call him Sudanese, but he's Nubian, self-described Nubian. And on Sunday night, he talked to us about his friendship with Malcolm. He took a friend from Sudan who was traveling back to Sudan after going to school here in the United States and was flying out of New York, spending a half day, and said, I want you to come pick me up. He said, okay. He said, what should I see in New York? He said, well, you ain't black. You coming to New York. You got to go to Harlem. Internationalism. I'm talking now to the descendants of slaves. I understand and I feel the pain, but you're going to come up out of that sickness because you're flying in the face of history. By the way, all this talk of tangibles and cut the check and all that, there's been more of it now since the election. And so as a result, I understand, wait, oh no, haven't heard any of it. How much of it was coming out of troll factories? And how much of it was just people who realized that you just ran yourself into a brick wall? We could not see. Out of the footnote, back to the conversation. Baba Osman was like, I'm going to take you to Harlem. So they went to Temple number 7. Malcolm was speaking that day. It's 1963. And what he said was that was the day I was listening to Malcolm, and he said something from the Quran that I thought was misinterpreted. So during the question and answer, I spoke up, and he and I started talking, and that led to a long friendship, at least as long as Malcolm's life was, which was only a couple of years. Baba Ahmed was a student at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. And he talked about becoming a friend of Malcolm X's. And he talked about long correspondence and books that he would send Malcolm and studying that he would do. And it was fascinating to hear this brother, Ahmed Osman, whose name I had seen in footnotes, but never encountered a brother who lives in the DMV. There's a film you can watch out there. I think it's on Vimeo. If you simply look up on your search engine, whichever one you use, Malcolm X and the Sudanese. That's going to be new in the compendium we have. In a moment, we're going to go through the compendium fairly quickly today in terms of the resources on Malcolm that we've made available here over the arc of these 5+ years and 271 and counting sessions. Look up that film. It's a short film. I don't even know if it's 30 minutes. Malcolm X and the Sudanese. Because what Baba Ahmed talks about, and what he talked about on Sunday night, Mother's Day, was that his friendship with Malcolm led to him, at the behest of his community, eulogizing Malcolm X at his funeral. Because Sister Betty asked that a Muslim ritual be performed at the funeral. And the leading imam in the area wasn't able to do it at the Islamic Center, so they called on Ahmed Osman, who had by then become friends with the family, and Ozzie Davis, whose powerful eulogy became the eulogy that we remember because that's the one that has been widely published and distributed here in this day. In fact, I think I brought my man, John Clark. Malcolm X, the man of his time, which we've talked about many times, but I will just take a moment because that's the one where you say the black shining prince, right? And this is a ritual moment. He says here, Ozzie Davis does, at this final hour in this quiet place, Harlem has come to bid farewell to one of its brightest hopes, extinguished now and gone from us forever. For Harlem is where he worked and where he struggled and fought, his home of homes, where his heart was and where his people are. And it is, therefore, most fitting that we meet once again in Harlem to share these last moments with him. For Harlem has ever been gracious to those who have loved her, have fought for her, and have defended her honor even to the death. It is not in the memory of a man that this beleaguered, unfortunate, but nonetheless proud community has found a braver, more gallant young champion than this Afro-American who lies before us, unconquered still. Ozzie Davis says, I say the word again as he would want me to. Afro-American Malcolm, who was a master, was most meticulous in his use of words. Nobody knew better than he the power of words and the power that they have over the minds of men. Malcolm had stopped being a Negro years ago, and he goes on. Did he ever smile at you? Did you ever hear him say a mean thing? Y'all stopped saying he was a prophet of violence and all these things. And he says at the end, and I'll just go over, he says, last year from Africa, he wrote these words to a friend. My journey, he says, is almost ended. And I have a much broader scope than when I started out, which I believe will add new life and dimension to our struggle for freedom and honor and dignity in the United States. I am writing these things so that you will know for a fact the tremendous sympathy and support we have among the African states for our human rights struggle. The main thing is that we keep a united front, unity, wherein our most valuable time and energy will not be wasted fighting each other. That's Malcolm. When Ozzie Davis finishes that eulogy, notice I deliberately did not bring out the black shining prince. That's the thing we begin to fixate on. But listen to what he did. He incorporated Malcolm's words into the eulogy. And when he finished, he called up a young brother who was a student at Dartmouth College, a Sudanese brother, a Nubian by the name of Ahmed Osman, who then delivered the Muslim eulogy and performed a ritual. And after that, they went to the cemetery. Peter Bailey, the last living pallbearer that carried Malcolm's body to the final grave, but he and Ahmed Osman covered that grave, covered that casket with dirt. And until Mother's Day, a few days ago, I never met Ahmed Osman. Very quiet, beautiful brother. He eulogized Malcolm that day in that funeral. We'll come back to a couple of things that he raised in that eulogy in a moment in Malcolm's words. But, as we think about what happened this week in the United States of America, the Supreme Court case is one of which I've mentioned. And then the other one, which has gotten most of the headlines, the war on the national concept. They want to reverse not just the 20th century, but the 19th up to the end of captivity and really go back to the 18th in terms of the white republic. They want white minority rule in this country. I have no problem with it because I know that this is the death rattle, friends. And when there's a death rattle, there's a frightening moment. And then there's death. They're dying. I couldn't be happier about the ideological death of white supremacy. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about an idea that is richly deserves death. And I'm talking about one that white people can give up. This book actually just came out. This is the cover. I put the book actually in my bag. This is the book, the Dust Jacket. An Ordinary White, My Anti-Racist Education. This is the memoir of David Rodiger, who is one of the people who is credited for coining, or at least becoming a founder of what is called whiteness studies. It's David Rodiger right there. David Rodiger. You see his picture there. It's not gonna allow me. There you go. Foundation Distinguished Professor of American Studies and History at the University of Kansas. His books include The Wages of Whiteness, which won awards and all this kind of thing. Class, Race, and Marxism. Probably known for his books of Wages of Whiteness. I usually have a Rodiger somewhere around here. I know the books by the colors, the titles. I could probably, I might have taken up there with the critical race theory stuff usually. But anyway, not a big deal. But you can give up whiteness if you want. Not a problem. You give up whiteness, maybe we'll give up blackness. Why? Because you created blackness anyway. Blackness is a response to whiteness. It's not a binary. Whiteness is the living core of white supremacy, and everything else is relegated to be displaced around that core. And that core can expand or contract depending on the agenda. The Pope, white. Leo, wait. What we going? Yeah, all them MAGA heads exploding is because Leo ain't as white as you want him to be. But then again, there was a time when the Italians weren't white, when the Irish weren't white. It ain't skin color, it's ideology. It's who is willing in many instances to say the N-word the loudest, because on the periphery of whiteness, the outer periphery, never to be reconciled and absorbed into whiteness, is blackness. Whiteness doesn't work without non-whiteness. And if the outer periphery of non-whiteness is blackness, you can't class your way in. The Brazilians certainly try. You can't race your way completely in, because now they're looking at Leo sideways because of his mother's parents, who are in the census as Haitian or Dominican. You got problems, but the point is that you can give up whiteness. You give up whiteness, maybe we can get rid of race. It's in its death rattle. And as we saw at the Supreme Court on Thursday, listening to the 2-hour oral arguments, you heard Ketanji Brown Jackson, you heard Elena Kagan, you heard Sonia Sotomayor do what they do, which is continue to articulate a vision of a possible United States based in the documents. But then you heard the defenders of white supremacy, Clarence Thomas, the Christian soldier, Sam Alito, argue to preserve the white republic. Imagine that, a Negro. You can't race your way in, Clarence. I don't care who you sleep with, who you marry, or what you espouse, sir. You will always be a Negro, my friend. It doesn't matter how many millions you take for trips or RVs. It doesn't matter how many people you induct into the Horace Mann Society, my friend. You're still going to be that Gullah Geechee Negro from the Pinpoint, Georgia, and around Savannah with your granddaddy. Nothing you can do will wash the stain on your soul that's based in the stain on your face, because it is a stain. If you put whiteness at the core of your humanity, everything else is on the periphery, and you on the periphery of the periphery. Even as other self-loathing black children trained in self-loathing by their parents who had absorbed the idea that black is somehow deficient, called you as the child ABC, America's blackest child, and scarred you apparently to this living day as you stood, or sat rather, now emboldened to talk after many years of complete and utter silence, saying to school children, as I saw you say in a speech you gave to some students, that you didn't open your mouth on the bench because you spoke in a way that reminded people that you were from the Sea Island area, that you spoke in a way that they call Geechee and Gullah, and you didn't like being made fun of. You are an embarrassment, sir. Forget to your ancestors. You're an embarrassment to yourself. And you proved it again on Thursday when you clung to the idea that the principle that says that a district court judge in this country, enjoining a policy that will be litigated on the merits later, can issue an injunction that will apply nationwide. You embarrassed yourself when you started asking, what's the origin of that? I think there's no origin of that in the history. There's no real background for that. Lied to the court, lied to the record on that. We all remember 2016 and 2017. You remember the so-called Muslim ban, people lined up at airports, John Foster Dulles here in the District of Columbia saying, oh my God, am I going to be able to get back in the country with my passport, my papers, with lawyers by the dozens, then by the hundreds, fighting, going to court. And then a district court judge says, you will not enact this Muslim ban. I am enjoining it, not just in Virginia, but nationwide on Thursday. The Supreme Court of the United States heard oral arguments from white nationalists that are taking a crack at getting rid of the idea of national bans. of national jurisdiction, and instead saying you can ban it here, but that doesn't apply over here. It don't even apply everywhere where you banned it. Why now? It one by one you got to go to court. That's what Kagan, that's what Sotomayor, that's what Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson were arguing. But then another couple of voices showed up that show you that perhaps whiteness is fragmenting in its death rattle. Beer Kavanaugh opened his mouth. Because if y'all heard me say many times, and I'll say it again today, just because the case was the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Civil War amendments. Let me go to 14 very quickly if I can find it. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment. Here it is. It's the 14th Amendment. You know, I keep a constitution around here. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution reads, sorry. And they're talking about the 14th Amendment in the context of the 13th Amendment. Hold on, let me see. Section 2, Section 3, 4, 5. Civil rights cases, Plessy versus Ferguson. Don't let me get started because, you know, the law is a fascinating thing to me. I wouldn't have gone to law school if it weren't. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, you know what it is? They're putting 13th in the conversation. Yeah, this isn't a plain constitution, by the way, y'all. The reason I'm flipping through it is because it puts the other amendments in conversation. You can spend your whole life just doing legal scholarship. And in another alternate universe, that's exactly what I would have done. Here we are. Sorry. Let me go to section 1. All right. Section 1, 14th Amendment. And you know what? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you all remember about a month and a half ago when Sherlyn Ifill opened up the 14th Amendment Center at Howard Law School, we devoted a whole session on that. Y'all can go back and look at the number. Just go about 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Section 1, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state in which wherein they reside. I'm going to stop right there. What they're hanging this idea on that if you're born in the United States, that doesn't automatically make you a sentence, is a citizen. If you're born in the United States, that doesn't automatically make you a citizen. It's the second part of that first clause. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Yeah, they're trying to create this cockamamie theory that used to be as one dude at Claremont Center, law professor out west, who made this cockamamie theory. Everybody laughing about it, but they've caught the car after 60 years of pushing back against your attempt to create human rights for everybody in the form of civil rights here in the United States through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment enabled Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is federal legislation pursuant to those Civil War amendments to make sure that they are enacted. Well, they've gotten the birthright citizenship argument before the United States Supreme Court. Not yet. This was the penultimate step. This is the step before the step. The first thing you got to do is stop district court judges from saying that this is absurd, and therefore any attempt to strip people of birthright citizenship or anything else like that, we're going to enjoin the whole country, but you can do it from the federal court level. The first step is to stop that. We're going to stop federal judges from stopping it everywhere. You expect Sotomayor, you expect Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson, you expect Elena Kagan to do it, but then Beer Kavanaugh piped in and said, hold on, man, talking to the Solicitor General, this hack, former Trump lawyer, now still a Trump lawyer, because the Solicitor General and Attorney General of the United States not supposed to work for the United States, for the President of the United States, but guess what? Everybody worked for Trump in this clown car called currently the executive branch of the federal government, and many people in the legislative branch, like the MAGA Muppet from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, but he asked the Solicitor General, this Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh says, hey, man, hold on. So how you going to test whether people are citizens or not? You got a test set up. And so this guy says, well, I don't know. We'll have to work that out. The officials had, well, he said, you're going to go in the delivery room? You're going to go in the maternity ward? What about the babies? I mean, the babies are born here. How are you going to? And so this guy starts talking about the baby's parents. Well, we got to determine whether they are here on B-1 visas or they're here legally. Oh, this ain't got to do with the 14th Amendment. They don't mention no parents. Yeah, but that's subject to the jurisdiction thereof. It's not. Don't try to figure this out because it doesn't make sense. Their job was to get it before the court and to try to get enough people on the court to go with the cockamamie theory. Trust me on this. The Christian soldier Alito and the wholly owned subsidiary of billionaires, Clarence Thomas, they hot for this deal. But Kavanaugh wavered. And then guess who else? Amy Coney Barrett. She seemed a little irritated. I said, oh, you don't have the votes. John Roberts, though, he done tore up his court. He done tore up his legacy. So he probably gonna go with them other three, Sotomayor, Brown Jackson, and Kagan. So that's 4 votes, but you still need another vote. It might be Kavanaugh, it might be Coney Barrett, or they might just narrow the concept of national jurisdiction to say a district court that decision to enjoin policy that will be sued and litigated later, that policy may only apply to that polity, except in certain cases. Maybe birthright citizenship would be one of the things where you still get national bans to litigate, maybe a major questions thing, you know what I mean? But at any rate, my point is that this happened this week. They try to return to the original concept of the white republic, and they want to put people out of the country who don't look like them, and they banning everybody from coming in the country except the people they want, which will be the Afrikaners. Bless you, Afrikaner. I know y'all wasn't living completely high in South Africa, because you wouldn't have left your paradise. But yeah, after 6 months and going to a few MAGA rallies and throwing your fists up in the air and all that, and Elon Musk give y'all a ride in one of his Teslas, when y'all got to get a job at Walmart and McDonald's like the rest of us, Fanny Hammer say, yeah, now you're going to stay in class. You might want to go back to Joburg, but Cyril Ramaphosa then told you, the president of South Africa, that you're cowards, because you don't want to build a polity where everybody has rights. You want to go to a white minority rule country like the one you was born in. And guess what? They done repurposed the Statue of Liberty. Come on. This is the white republic. Stephen Miller, I smell your death rattle, boy. It's about over. But guess what? The national jurisdiction and birthright citizenship, the thing that was settled in law, as Kagan said and Sotomayor said, going back to 1898 and the Wong Kim Ark case. Wong Kim Ark's parents came from China. Wong Kim Ark's parents came from China, and once they got here to the United States, they had a baby. The baby, Wong Kim Ark, is not from China. The baby is from the United States. And so therefore, you get to stay here because you're a birthright citizen. Now, what's interesting is, and we'll talk about this maybe another day because we don't have a lot of time today, and I don't want to get too deep into it. But in fact, there's an article I was reading about what happened to him in 1901. He's a cook, Wong Kim Ark. He crossed from Juarez, Mexico, to El Paso, Marty Robbins, out in the West Texas town of El Paso. Wong Kim, it's the same Wong Kim Ark. He comes back into the United States, maybe the only person in the world who had a United States Supreme Court ruling declaring him by name to be a citizen of the United States, because his parents from China, but he was born here. That didn't stop El Paso immigration officials from arresting him and beginning deportation proceedings. This is 1901. What is that, 124 years ago, October the 9th, almost, 1901, Charles Mahan called a Chinese inspector in El Paso. They ain't even looking for Mexicans, because guess what? There ain't no border when it comes to that. You know how many people do business on both sides of them borders, even to this day, even as the clown has put 8,500 people and sent all kind of military people down there in planes and all kind of other ish, then put all that stuff down there. Got an ex-Green Beret now going down there to run the operation. During Biden's time, they had maybe 15 to 1,800 officers. Now, they done quadrupled that almost. Actually, more than quadruple, 8,500. But my point is this. They weren't looking for Mexicans in 1901. They ain't looking for them now. Quietly, if you start talking about all the business that goes back and forth, but in 1901, they got a Chinese inspector in El Paso because the Chinese, the yellow peril, this is the racism. They're against them, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1885. They arrested Wong October 1901 on grounds that he was in the United States in violation of the 1882 law called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Took 4 months for him to render a ruling. Again. But I thought the Supreme Court said, yeah, I'm a citizen. My name in the damn decision. My name is Wong Kim Ark. Wait, you Wong Kim Ark? Or as they were calling him in oral arguments the other day, Kim, was established, which reinforced the fact that the 14th Amendment says if you're born here, you're a citizen. And these white nastics is like, well, what about subject to the jurisdiction thereof? He came out of his mother's womb in the United States. He's subject to the jurisdiction where his parents subject. That ain't got nothing to do. Y'all people crazy as hell. Alito and Thomas sitting back there, you think we crazy, but we can count. We need about 1 or 2 more things. Elections don't matter. The parties are the same. I am here now to reinforce in the minds of everyone. This is one of the reasons they do. Lost your damn minds, but we're gonna help you recover it, just like Malcolm recovered his mind in prison, the mind that he had carefully nurtured and developed by his parents. After he lost his way, getting caught up in the game after they destroyed his family and tried to and killed his father and put his mama in what would be the equivalent of crazy house. Took 2 generations almost to get her out. But the point is that he got reintroduced to himself. That self-determination isn't a reinvention, Brother Marable, powerful ancestor that you are. It's a reinforcement of what he already knew. It took 4 months for Wong Kim to win a ruling again that he was a U.S. citizen and couldn't be deported. The verdict in El Paso came almost 4 years after the Supreme Court, in a landmark case, settled the issue of citizenship for him and for all the kids born to immigrants in the United States. People know the Wong Kim Ark story, but many people don't know they arrested Wong Kim Ark again, and coming to 2025, they don't care whether it's legal or not. We're just going to do this shit and see what happens. This is the Trump playbook, the art of the steal. Let's just do it and see what happens. We're just going to do things, as the Joker said in Batman. See what happens. Who's going to stop us? As Mike Harriet said in Contraband Camp, we're going to check you. Do not despair. Malcolm said, do not react in silence. Now is the time you fight. I think, Brother Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, gestured toward the possibility that maybe they will challenge the firing of the Librarian of Congress, because it ain't the Library of the President of the United States, it's the Library of Congress. It ain't the Library of the Executive Branch, it's the Library of Congress. And even as we know, while they unceremoniously fired Dr. Carla Hayden, what they're really after is the Copyright Office, where they fired that person too and they want to put their person in. But at least at this point, the interim director is the number 2 under Carla Hayden. She put him there. So he's running the Library of Congress right now, because even some of the Republicans in Congress are like, wait a minute, hold on, this is the Library of Congress. What the hell are you doing? Oh, you want to turn over the copyright stuff and all of our private conversations, this being the Library of Congress and them having a record of everything we talk about, including the off the record stuff. You want to get into our stuff. This would be even scarier if Marjorie Taylor Greene could read. But the point is this. It wasn't just about the indignity, and it damn sure wasn't about DEI, because the only DEI in this country is whiteness. This was about getting at the records, getting at the information, and having nobody stand in their way. And it is not unsettled. We must fight. I'm saying we should fight for the restoration of Carla Hayden, because you broke the law. But they break the law every day. They were breaking the law in 1901 when they arrested Kim again. Took him 4 years to get it right. I don't care if it takes 400 years. The time to address a wrong is when it occurs. Malcolm would say that. This is why people say, well, he was against Dr. King. Was he against Dr. King? You haven't studied. Dr. King went to Chicago, met with Elijah Muhammad, and he said, do you really believe all white people are devils? And read what James Baldwin wrote about when he went to visit Elijah Muhammad. Read what was written about Dr. King's visit to Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad, this is what Elijah Muhammad said to him. He didn't say, he didn't say that W.D. Fard teaches us this or the Holy Quran teaches us this. He turned into Elijah Poole from Sandersville, Georgia, talking to Martin Luther King from Atlanta, Georgia, and he said, Dr. King, we're both Georgia boys. We know snakes. Of course, he was taking some liberties because Dr. King grew up in the city, but he said, we Georgia boys. Or I can't do Elijah Muhammad, but let me try. Dr. King, we Georgia boys. You know snakes. Some snakes are green, some are red, some have stripes, some don't. But they're all snakes. Then they say both start laughing. Come on now. Y'all can't do that to die. Stop trying to make Black people hand puppets in your racial logic. And if you don't want to read Black people telling you to do that, go get a fine white scholar like David Rodiger. He'll tell you the same thing. Because he said, I grew up very white, very working class, and I came to my consciousness, and I'm very clear. The problem here is whiteness. An ordinary white, my anti-racist education. I'm going to read David Rodiger before I read even Kendrick, but it's cool. We don't want to do that right now. But the point is this. As Trump is in his international humiliation tour, The Art of the Steal, and as he's making these deals as they feather his nest, the world continues. Malcolm X was an internationalist. Peter Bailey says that this is one of the things. He says he's a listener, he's a master teacher, he's an internationalist, he's a Pan-Africanist. He believed in Black unity. He would put internationalists and Pan-Africanists in the same category. So he said unity, Pan-Africanism or internationalism, listening very intently and teaching, master teacher. These things made Malcolm X who he was, according to my friend Peter Bailey, to Baba Peter Bailey. You can hear him say it for yourself if you come anywhere near DC on Malcolm's birthday, the 19th, 6 p.m., Howard University Student Center. But this question then of what we're going to do in this context, Malcolm, I can hear him now because this is what he said. We don't have to hear him. You can hear him on the recordings, or you can read what he wrote. Malcolm spent much of the last year of his life in Africa. And as he did, he talked about the possibility of Black solidarity, Black unity, and not just Black people, the unity of people who wanted to end injustice globally, taking the United States before the United Nations. And so as a result, what we have is a record of what he was trying to do. And as we think about the fact that the African Union announced in February that this year, that the African Union is working, they did a press release. This was actually the press release. Yeah, the press release was in February, but they had a dialogue the first week of May. They had an African Union meeting in Addis Ababa. You know what the event's theme was? It's the theme of this year. It's the theme that will guide their meeting in Addis Ababa in September, which will be the first meeting between the countries on the continent of Africa and the countries of the Caribbean. By the way, those countries of the Caribbean just had a meeting in Beijing with the Chinese, the China CELAC conference. The chair of CELAC right now, which is the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, the Caribbean and Latin American states community, CELAC. The chairs from Colombia, they're making deals right now. Brazil making deals. Argentina, Chile is gonna have some problems, but they got beef, and the Chinese want the beef. They got soybeans. The people want the soybeans. They're making deals, and the reason I'm raising this is because in Addis, all the Caribbean countries gonna meet with the African countries in Addis in September. And guess who's also invited? That would be us. I'm speaking now to the descendants of the slaves. Well, American cut the check, on tangibles. Okay, all that volume got lowered down. Now listen to the world organizing. You gonna be with us or not? Don't invoke Malcolm X. And I know there's some hardcore 8 hours foundational Black American B1, whatever, they would not include Malcolm X because his mother's from Grenada by way of Canada, thereby cutting off not just nose, but face, just head. Complete ignorance. Well, guess what? This isn't the place for ignorance. This is the place for understanding. And this is a place for unity. You come on too, but what you're going to stop doing is clinging to your master. Your master is getting his nest feathered by the sovereign wealth funds, and his son's getting pilfered with money. And his son-in-law and made his daughter the richest one out of all of them because they've been pumping Jared Kushner with so much money over the last 2 or 3 years that you should be embarrassed to even bring it up. So if you're talking about tangibles, maybe y'all trying to get a job in a restored Trump casino, well, you got to go to Dubai or UAE because the one in Atlantic City is gone. But the point is this: while all that's going on, the world is turning to each other, and we got an invitation to come because the theme of this year, the theme they discussed, their policy people discussed at the 7th policy dialogue from the 7th to the 9th of May, 2025. In other words, just a week ago, a little over a week ago, the theme was justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. That's right. Even as the domestic news media covered the good sister Summer Lee, my former student, brilliant young legislator out of Western Pennsylvania. Also the good sister Cori Bush, who was present as well, who gave remarks, even though she's no longer a congresswoman. Summer Lee taking the torch from Sheila Jackson Lee, no biological relation, but absolutely ideological relation, taking the torch from John Conyers, whose birthday was Friday, May the 16th, 2025. Who introduced the first iterations of HR 40. Summer Lee said we need reparations. Reparations ain't just for Black people. Reparations for Black people will ultimately help put a floor under all people. Listen to what Ms. Hamer said at the beginning of our conversation today. Those repairs will help create a polity that will create a bottom level of human rights, a floor for human rights in this country. Restoring that will enable and empower everyone. Well, guess what? Stephen Miller doesn't want everybody in power. He wants his white fever dream. His white fever dream, which he is mistaken for a vision, which is in fact a death rattle. He wants that white minority rule. You think he's not the architect between him and Elon Musk? These Afrikaners coming here, these 15, 20 Afrikaners who gonna catch hell? Who Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, called cowards because y'all don't want to build no multiracial democracy in South Africa. If we had done what y'all did to us, it wouldn't be no white people in South Africa. We would have took all that land, thrown y'all in the sea. And don't think there weren't people who were advocating for that. But guess what? Mandela, we're not going to do that, which means a lot of people call him a traitor, say, man, you should have got rid of them white people. No, we're not going to do that. But what you didn't do is dispossess them of the land. You didn't dispossess the Boers, the farmers of the land. You didn't dispossess the Afrikaners and the British, the whites of South Africa, of their control of banking institutions and corporations. You didn't do any of that. The mines, you didn't nationalize any of it. Why? Because the white world was like, no, we're not going to let you do that. And you let them destroy the nuclear program before they gave the keys to you. The running joke in South Africa being, since the time of Mandela and coming in, when Mandela took over, the white people said, we will give you the crown, but we're going to keep the jewels. So them Afrikaners, don't cry for them, the most protected minority in Africa, the Afrikaners. And you think somehow you're going to trade that for some whiteness in the United States? You don't come to the death rattle, and guess what? The death rattle coming to Africa too. They are meeting in Addis in September on the theme of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. And if you don't think Summer Lee doesn't understand how domestic conversations about reparations in this country, Yvette Carnell, all the rest of them, God bless y'all. You will go over there in that corner and argue yourselves into a frenzy. Go right ahead. But what you're not going to do is knock us off a vision that Malcolm X received from Queen Mother Moore and them and gave forward to us, which is that reparations is a global conversation. And don't think you're getting around it by saying, I agree, but everybody should fight for it in their own place. That ain't how it works, my friend. Elon Musk, Donald Trump, the entire United States government and the governments of other countries, you think they only advance themselves based on what is good for the people within the four corners of their countries? No, they don't respect national boundaries. You're the only one talking about national boundaries because you have no power and you have no understanding of how power works in the modern world system. Come on in on Monday nights, 8 to 10, office hours. Here we are in Nubia, and you can come in and maybe get an education. If you're feeling feisty, you might even come on in on the conversation side, and we can flesh this out, and then we'll test how far your understanding goes. But Malcolm X was clear. Malcolm X was clear. Reparations is owed, but don't expect it to ever come if you don't have power. And power is something you take. Power is not something you beg for, which is why Malcolm X was ungovernable. And in the wake of his death, whether it be Alex Haley leaving out chapters that would have expanded on Pan-Africanism and internationalism, whether it be the books that try to make him into some kind of liberal Democrat or ultimately a patriot in the arc of George Washington, when you just read his words to see that that's not true, there's a hostile attempt and a perpetual attempt to reimagine, which means mischaracterize Malcolm. Let's begin to wind this up. Malcolm X, we've talked about it many times here in these in-class sessions. And so I went back into our compendium, and this is just as of last September. And obviously this one will be added as it continues to update. Our first major conversation about him in terms of an extended conversation was session 62. Who was Malcolm to us? We even talked about Peter Bailey's memoir, Witnessing Brother Malcolm X, the Master Teacher. That's his memoir. We also mentioned that in session 79 and 89. I'm giving everybody these numbers so that the folk on the YouTube side, you can go on the YouTube channels, Professor Hunter, Karen Hunter's YouTube channel, and the Knarrative YouTube channel, and find the numbers for yourself. And of course, Knarrative, all of these things are listed and labeled in sequence for your pleasure. And of course, with our sister Cheryl R. Lay, you see the bibliographies in them. And with the compendium, all this is sliced and diced a number of ways in the 1,600 pages or so of the compendium. So not just listed by episode, but listed by bibliography, everything that's in there, not just the books, but the pamphlets, not just the pamphlets, but the videos, not just the videos, but other forms and materials for research. And you can go back and forth and toggle back and forth. So in session 115, we asked the question, should we let the house burn down? What would Malcolm X do? We saw the plantation house in Louisiana burn to the ground. 140 plus Africans were held captive on that plantation, and they went up in flame. The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let the ancestors cook. Cook, ancestors, cook. But at any rate, so 115, session 115, should we let the house burn down? What would Malcolm X do? We talked about that. Session 158, we talked about Malcolm X, the FBI, and global responsibility. And we go back and look at that in terms of his surveillance. Session 166. Interestingly enough, 166 was, we led with and spent much of our time talking about stolen focus. But if you remember, I was in Philadelphia at the time, my friend and brother, Martin Lamont Hill, having his annual Malcolm X symposium. That was also the week that we talked about the transition of the great Usini Jean Perkins, who, like so many others, was inspired by Malcolm X. We discussed Make It Plain in that session, the video, the documentary. And we also talked about Peter Bailey's second book, his most recent book, where he republishes. He was the editor of the OAAU journal, their publication, their newsletter called Black Watch. And so they published, Peter did, as the editor, Black Watch issues that he reproduces in this book. The book is entitled Brother Malcolm X's Strategic Pan-Africanism, an important guide for people of African descent. Now, since we've done 166, I was able to get my hands on a couple of books that speak to the imagining after Malcolm of how we would do strategic Pan-Africanism, one of which was a novel by, interestingly enough, David Graham Du Bois, the son of Shirley Graham Du Bois, and not biological son, but adopted son of W.E.B. Du Bois. Remember Shirley Graham, and Shirley Graham welcomes Malcolm to Ghana when he spends time there, along with Maya Angelou, the great Maya Angelou, Julian Mayfield. We talked about all these folks, the great Alice Wyndham, recent ancestor, and Shirley Graham introduces him to Kwame Nkrumah. The Du Boises have to leave Ghana after Nkrumah dies, and is deposed first and then killed. Well, they say killed, died of disease, but was deposed. They end up spending time in Egypt. David Graham Du Bois writes a novel, And Bid Him Sing, where he creates this fictional character, which is kind of really him. And he looks at these people who have now, in some ways, been cut off from Malcolm X in terms of the ideology, but how they're grappling in Africa. These are African people from the United States grappling with the question of tactical Pan-Africanism. It's a fascinating novel, And Bid Him Sing. But Peter Bailey writes about this in real time, because he was there with Malcolm. And he said Malcolm spent most of that last year of his life in Africa. And he met with all these heads of state, not at one time, one by one, in meetings that lasted an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours with Nasser and all the rest of it, including you're sitting with these Africans. I'm talking to descendants of slaves. Uh-oh, how'd I do this? I got to stop this. And this new fancy camera has got me twisted. The Autobiography of Malcolm, of course, we talked about that many times. When I looked through the compendium, in some details, sessions 62, 158, 167, 191, 206. Malcolm X Speaks, which is one of the great compendiums of his speeches and writings, sessions 79, 83, 115, 158. Malcolm X on Afro-American History, an important little pamphlet that a lot of people, that's one of the first places I got a chance to really read Malcolm when I was an undergraduate. Session 46. Nice little pamphlet, good for young people. Where should we start? Get your teenagers to read Malcolm X on Afro-American History. It's small, it's succinct, it's from a lecture, and it's brilliant, and it's very clear. He's very clear. He's always very focused and very clear. Malcolm, the Diary of Malcolm X. This is the journal he kept when he was over there after he made the Hajj and everything. The good brother, my friend Herb Boyd, the elder, edited that. I think Ilyasah Shabazz was one of the daughters who helped with that. It was caught up for a while. Third World Press publishes it. You can listen to our conversation around that in sessions 62 and 166. By Any Means Necessary, another volume of speeches in session 115. Now, in terms of narrative representations of Malcolm X, not what he wrote, but what was written about him, there are several that are good. You know, Paul Lee, my friend Paul Lee out of Detroit, often calls Peter Goodman, Malcolm X, his forever best biographer. I don't disagree with Paul. And if I did, he would just say I'm crazy, and I would probably agree with Paul. There have been a lot of biographies of Malcolm, and as I said, the most recent one actually just came out. I'm contemplating putting this in my bag as I travel, but this is the after. Oh, good Lord. Stop it. Stop it. Look, y'all see my knees here, my shorts and my knees. I'm sitting here. I'm trying to make this thing stop. Is that how I stop it? All right, there we go. There we go. Look, it's sideways. The Afterlife of Malcolm X, Mark Whitaker. See that? An outcast turned icon's enduring impact on America. It's fine. I'm laughing because put some lotion on. That's how I put it. All right. This is the one though. This is the Death and Life of Malcolm X. This is gonna be a problem. I don't know how to stop it. Hold on, let me see if I can make it while I'm doing it here. The controller. If I can stop it here, I can make it stop everywhere. Did I do it? That did it. No, I didn't.
No, that we're going back.
I don't know how to do it.
What?
What
is this? What is this?
You know what it is? I got a new camera.
Why?
So that I could stop it from. This is so funny to me. This is what I get for technology.
Listen,
No,
I'm impressed.
Here it is.
I'm impressed.
Here it is. Let me go up here, and it requires you to yeah, look, you are cracking up because I'm cracking up. Now I'm sideways.
Yes.
Sitting sideways. If Gerald was here, he would be queuing up, sitting sideways. I'm tripping. Let me put this down.
Yes.
All right, let me put this down. This is hilarious to me because it's something with, oh, here it is. Here it is. I know what to do now. Now, I think that might have done it. I think that might have done it.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
That did it.
I'm impressed.
I'm not. You're impressed. Yeah. Technology in real time. The Death and Life of Malcolm X, Peter Goldman. This is a white dude who befriended Malcolm X. He said, we weren't friends. I don't think we could have ever been friends based on this color of our skin. He said, however, I spent a lot of time with Malcolm. He interviews everybody with the exception of a couple of people. Betty Shabazz wouldn't talk to him. He seems to think race was really at the core of that. But there was only one or two other people, but he talks about everybody else. Ella Collins, Malcolm's sister, which is in many ways the shaping force. She's the Garveyite. She's Earl's daughter, and she's the one who takes Malcolm in Boston. And she's the one who pays for his Hajj when he goes. She was going herself and then paid. Oh, by the way, Brother Usman, I forgot to remember this. Brother Ahmed makes this point. He said, after the eulogy, after the funeral, I then approached Betty. How can I help? And she said, I want to make a Hajj. Do you know it was Ahmed Usman who helped put the money together and who took Betty Shabazz to the Hajj weeks after her husband had been killed? It's like, man, really? You did that? Yeah. She makes it to Hajj and then travels herself. So Betty Shabazz is, I mean, international figure is very important. But anyway, this is probably the best because what this book consists of is Peter Goldman's interpretation. Fine, take it or leave it. I do more leaving than taking, but that's not the point. It's interview after interview after interview after interview with Malcolm's people, with the people who knew him, with writers like John Oliver Killens, with John Henry Clark, Benjamin Goodman, who is Benjamin Kareem, who was there today, one of his lieutenants. It's just really fascinating to read all of these people who Peter Goldman talked to. So I see why Paul Lee, the great Paul Lee, an incredible researcher on Malcolm X, would call it. By the way, Peter Goldman's still around. In fact, Mark Whitaker ends his book, The Afterlife of Malcolm X, with the trial, well, the releasing of the two men who were accused of killing Malcolm X, who were acquitted, and one of them then goes to meet Peter Goodman at a restaurant. Peter Goodman is too ill or too feeble to take the steps up to the top. So this brother comes down to meet Peter Goodman. It's very interesting. Anyway, so that's the end of Mark Whitaker's book. But Peter Goldman is the book, probably what you want to talk about. Malcolm X, The Man of His Times, which I love this book because it too is contemporary. And these are the black folk, Isaac Davis, John Henry Clark, Earl Grant. So everybody, we talked about this many times. We've talked about it at least in 3 sessions, sessions 62, 89, and 127. On Betty Shabazz, Russell Rickford's biography of her. Betty Shabazz, A Remarkable Story of Survival and Faith, Before and After Malcolm X, session 62. Ilyasha Shabazz, Growing Up X, and the other YA that she's done. I'm looking over there on the shelf, The Awakening of Malcolm X, and her first volume on her father. Session 62 is her memoir, Growing Up X, a memoir by the daughter of Malcolm X. The Awakening of Malcolm X, also in session 62, we talk about as her latest YA book. A good primary source document is the Malcolm X Reader. Garrett Felder co-edited that with Manny Marable, published posthumously, of course. We actually first evoked that in session 14, and then again in 89 and in 166, and then the Reader directly in 62. Session 62 is one of those anchor sessions as well. The kind of the Manny Marable book we talked about in sessions 14, 62, and 89. There were also responses to Manny Marable's book, Herb Boyd's book, edited By Any Means Necessary, which I think I have here. Herb Boyd, Ron Daniels, Marlana Karinga, and Hakeem by Hakeem Abudi. Here it is. We talked about this book as well as Jared Ball and Todd Stephen Burrow's book, Malcolm X, A Lie of Reinvention. Go in that one for session 62, 89, and 166. The newer volumes, as I said, Les and Tamara Payne, the late Les Payne and his daughter Tamara, who finished it. The Dead Are Rising, who I know that you've been in conversation with, Prof. We talked about that book in sessions 30, 33, 51, 62, 89, and 166. Randy Roberts and Johnny Smith wrote a book called Blood Brothers, The Fatal Friendship Between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, which we want to talk about again today. I'm coming to a close. 62, 79, and 80. On the assassination, FBI surveillance, and internationalization. As I said a while ago, I'll come back to it, give you some numbers. George Brightman's book, The Last Year of Malcolm X, The Evolution of a Revolutionary, session 136. Carl Evans, The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, session 89. Babazak Kondo, Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X, sessions 62 again and 89 again. That's the best single book on the assassination. People watch Netflix and Who Killed Malcolm X. Okay, yeah, okay, fine. They interviewed Zach Kondo a long time for that series and only put clips of him very quickly in there. Nah, go read Babazak Kondo's book. In fact, he's got a second edition he said he's been working on. You check in and see where he is on that. Marika Sherwood, dealing with internationalization, sessions 62, 158, and 166. She did a book on Malcolm X visits abroad. She published another book before she made transition, but look her name up, Marika Sherwood. Personal memoir and books, very interesting. Louis Lomax, we talked about him fairly extensively. He did a book called To Kill a Black Man, where he compares the assassinations of Dr. King and Malcolm X. That would be in session 62 as well. 62 is a keystone session. When the Word is Given, a report on Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and the Black Muslim World, sessions 62 and 89, again 62. And Louis Lomax, I want to bring him up with something for another reason. Maybe next week we'll talk about Louis Lomax as well, because he did a book called The Reluctant African, where he traveled through Africa. And I thought about it, I actually pulled, I had it here, not in storage. So I started rereading it because he goes through Congo. This is when we were talking about Patrice Lumumba, and I know I didn't get a chance to talk about him, but I want to put that interesting dude from Columbus, Georgia. Jan Carew. I remember we talked about Jan Carew out of Guyana, who was in England when he met Malcolm. He wrote a little memoir called Ghosts in Our Blood, the former partner of Sylvia Wynter, the great Jamaican philosopher, Jamaican-Cuban philosopher. The name of his book is Ghosts in Our Blood, with Malcolm X in Africa, England, and the Caribbean. Sessions 48, and there it is again, 62. 62 would probably be the one, if you got to look at one, to start with. Hakeem Jamal, who knew Malcolm from the streets. He wrote a book called From the Dead Level, Malcolm X and Me, session 48. Benjamin Kareem, who I mentioned here, Goodman interviewed Remembering Malcolm, sessions 62 and 89. He was in the OAAU. And of course, Fanny Lou Hamer, from the clip we heard, session 83. I wrote an article early on in my academic career called You Don't Call the Kittens Biscuits, Malcolm X and Africana Studies. I'm developing that Africana Studies framework. This is probably 25 years ago. No, maybe about 20 years ago. And it was published in a volume called Malcolm X, edited by my friend James Conyers, who is an ancestor now. He was at the University of Houston. That's in session 142. Teresa Perry, Monty Perry's mom, an incredible book that she edited called Teaching Malcolm X. Again, session 62. The films, of course, Spike Lee's Malcolm X. We talk about that in sessions 92, 124, 151, 187, and 209. The Gil Noble series on Malcolm after he was made transition, sessions 89, 134, 183, 206. Those influenced by Malcolm X, we talked about Mario Bedelli, at least in session 70. I know we talked about him before, but Dudley Randall and Margaret Burroughs, whose books are across my shoulder there, a poetry book by one of the founders of the DuSable Museum, the Ebony Museum, Margaret Burroughs, she and her husband Charlie, and the great Dudley Randall, the founder of Broadside Press in Detroit, the poetry press, a poet himself. They put a book of poetry together in the wake of Malcolm's passing called For Malcolm, poems on the life and death of Malcolm X. Look at sessions again, 62 and 131. We even talk about Malcolm X College and then in Chicago, and Malcolm X Grassroots University in North Carolina. My man Rich Benson wrote the book on that, session 156. I think there's more we could do, but I'm going to pause here because that was just to give people a flavor for, particularly people who are new. And if you're in the newbie side, go over tomorrow on Saturday and hit the like button. Everybody, tell everybody like, subscribe. We continue to keep that algorithm, as you would say, Proud Freaked, But ultimately, just know that we've done a lot of work over the arc of these 271 sessions and all the work in between. All the folks, a couple of people called today, Prof. You can come on back. I'm done. The people who called, it was like called into Sirius and like, I'm waiting to get in Nubia. I'm waiting to get in Nubia. I said, no problem. You be there in a minute. They're in Knarrative. They're coming in Nubia. So the people keep coming. And Malcolm X gave us a blueprint on what to do. And we add everything we know and we'll be just fine.
I'm trying to find You Don't Call Kittens Biscuits so that we can put on the bookshelf. So I'll have a mod find it. And
so I can give you a
PDF.
I'll show you the book. It's
Come on, legs.
Okay. Oh, I ain't because it's finally warm outside. That's why I can do it, right? Oh, wait a minute. That's crazy because normally I keep the things that I published in books in one place, but I also keep it over here with Baba Jetty and them. And for some reason, when I get off, it's going to bite me. But right now, I don't see it.
It's okay. I found we're gonna find a digital copy.
I'll send you a copy.
Okay, we gotta go. We gotta build
almost time for Philadelphia. So
and for those of you in Knarrative with a K, Knarrative.com, we have a whole bookshelf that you can go, and some of them we've even inserted videos like Souls of Black Folk that you and I, Dr. Carr and I had a conversation about. So it's embedded, so you can also watch and read, and we're doing things.
We're doing a whole lot. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, I should mention too that they have something at the museum, but this is very disturbing. Sister Laina Mataka, a poet here, they're doing something on the 24th of May at Sankofa on Malcolm X and literature. Dr. Nubia Kai and some others going to be there. We were told the other night that because there's stuff all this month on Malcolm, that she was asked to have her poem pre-cleared at the museum, and failing that would be disinvited to read the poem. My thing is, that's beautiful. So there's an outside the museum, right? So read the poem outside the museum in the spirit of Malcolm X, and Peniel Joseph can give the official talk inside, and we'll have both sides covered. But what we're not gonna do is follow your rules. So anyway.
Yes. I'm looking forward to Monday's show. Kevin Powell's going to be on, and we're going to talk with Yuri Kochiyama's daughter.
Really?
On Monday, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I didn't mention Yuri Kochiyama. We talked a lot about her. Go back to 62.
The 19th is her birthday as well. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Lorraine Hansberry.
Wow.
Ho Chi Minh. Malcolm X. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's going to be a power. Did you see? I just saw it dropped part of maybe the whole interview that Kevin did with Spike Lee.
Yeah. It's in Newsweek. I'll drop a link. I just actually talked with Kevin night before last because I'm doing for the podcast a special Malcolm X on his birthday. So we cover his Newsweek piece with Spike, who's on the cover, and how impactful Malcolm was to his life. It's just having these platforms. As Shauna Renee said, her dad, only came on the radio to magnify, the civil rights activism. You have platforms to change the world, hopefully for the better, I think. And if you're using your platform to not do that, what's the point? What's the point?
Right. What's the point? My sister tried to save me. Thank you, Doc. Courtney told me how to do it to disable this joint. This is why I'm talking myself getting fancy. But that's all right. That's all right, Doc. Oh, by the way, happy. I know it's around that time. We still got a couple of weeks in DCPS. Happy commencement to everybody graduating. It's a bunch of people graduating. My young boy Jabari Harris down there at Westlake High School in Atlanta. My niece graduating, coming out of Houston. On Saturday she'll be graduating. So Eden Haley Fuller, everybody graduating.
Good.
Everybody graduating. So I saw Roy did a conversation with Will about this president search at FAMU. They was I just saw it on social media. The two of them on was a Facebook or whatever. How you do with the split screen. I'm like, what is Roy doing? Oh man, I hope that's
his show got picked up, so he's gonna do another season on HBO. Was it CNN? That CNN show he does. They're getting another season, which tells you that CNN it says a lot. But I'm happy for him.
Love happy for him too.
Roy Wood Jr. is amazing,
no question. I watched the whole conversation he had what's our sister, the Afro Latina comedian?
Ida Rodriguez.
Yeah, they were
Yes.
talking. They were in Carr.
Oh
I was
my
like,
God.
I couldn't turn it off. I was trying to do something else. I just put this on. I had to sit down and watch.
Wait, her book right there.
Yeah, it is right there. I know that's your. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Your sister. That's what I said. I said, look at them. You know what? You know what? The days of 3 networks and even cable are over. And so this is the. It's not the future. It's the present.
We're here.
We didn't get into Starlink. You can't stop people. Musk leaning on Gambia trying to get the U.S. Chinese gonna eat y'all lunch, and guess what? We're gonna have lunch too on African terms, but maybe descendants of slaves too once you wake up. Shout out to Malcolm X. All right, so love you. I'm gonna run.
Okay, bye,
See
y'all.
y'all.
I'll see some of you on Sirius XM. I'll see some of you there, and the rest of you have a wonderful weekend.